Most modern zoos nowadays have much more open spaces. As you can see in these photos, the animals can roam around very freely.
The elephants in the early 1900s were kept in this building. They used to be very cramped and unhappy. Now they have been moved to ZSL Whipside Zoo, where there is more space.
In the aquarium there is a conservation breeding program to help preserve endangered fish. London Zoo help breed these fish so they do not become extinct.
Many enclosures in the zoo have been expanded and have got a lot bigger. For example, the penguins have been moved from the small penguin pool to the penguin beach. This is much more bigger.
The gorillas in the early 1900s could interact with visitors and even have tea with guests. They used to be caged. Now they have a huge open space to live and enjoy themselves.
There is a vast variety of species in the aquarium, and visitors are now able to see how many different types of aquatic organisms there are in the sea.
How has the method of conservation changed since the early 90s?
The method of conservation has changed significantly since the early 90s. I think we're moving in a direction of keeping things more natural for the animals. So instead of keeping them in small cages, allowing people to interact with them, we try and keep things more like their natural environment. So just better enclosures, bigger spaces, more natural food, and that sort of stuff.
If animals have offspring, do they stay in the zoo?
Yes, if animals breed naturally here in the zoo, which a lot of them do, we do keep their offspring if possible. For example, in our rainforest enclosure, the monkeys, especially the tamarins, have had really successful breeding, and a lot of them have stayed here to grow up with their parents. Same with the squirrel monkey enclosure. Last year we had 5 or 6 born right there in the enclosure, and they are still in there. However, if, for example, in a lot of primate groups, there's one dominant male, and if any adolescent males get old enough to challenge him, then we'll have to relocate that animal to another zoo for breeding purposes.
How have you changed the enclosures?
A big change to our enclosures is space. I think I said this earlier, just giving animals more natural space to interact with each other in a more natural setting. So for example, we have our old penguin pool, which was quite small in design, and now we just opened Penguin Beach last year, and it's much bigger, it's much more natural. The rainforest enclosure is the same thing. It actually mimics a rainforest, so we have plants brought in from actual rainforests to mimic the natural environment. So it's everything to make the animals feel as comfortable in their habitat as possible. So gone are the days of cages and tight enclosures and uncomfortable settings, and now we're opening things up to big open spaces and natural enclosures.
Where'd you get the animals from?
There's an international database for all zoos, so there's a registry that all zoos are connected to that lists all the animals at various zoos. It lists their age, it lists their genetic details, and that sort of thing. That way you can open up the registry and pull animals from other zoos. The thing is, you don't want an animal that is for breeding purposes. You don't want, say, an animal that can breed with its sibling or a relative. You want to have as much interbreeding as possible and genetic variation. So we use that registry to get animals from different zoos to come here. We also try and find animals that will move the shortest distance. So for example, if we meet a new gorilla, we'll look to Ireland or Dublin Zoo or Edinburgh Zoo or something that's close, because we don't want a long journey for them.
Are visitors allowed to interact with the animals?
That's a great question. In some places they can, but ideally like I said, we want to keep everything as natural as possible. So we want to keep our animals as close to their natural environment, so as wild as possible, which means that we don't want people interacting with them. The only place that we have interaction with the animals here on a regular basis is in the petting zoo. But those are domesticated animals. So those are going to be goats and sheep. So animals that actually spend more time with people than in the natural environment. But other than that, we try and keep everything as natural as possible. So no human interaction.
So how long do you keep the animals?
In most cases, we keep the animals for their entire lives. If an animal is comfortable and thriving and is healthy in our zoo, then we will keep that animal all the way till the end of its life. Sometimes we do have to move animals because if they get competitive with other animals in their enclosure, then we'll relocate them to another zoo so that they're not interfering with the natural habitat.
What should the role of a modern zoo be?
That's a big question, and a lot of people have differing opinions, but the role of a modern zoo should really primarily be about education. I think it's important for visitors to come here and to learn about animals, and not just about the animals and their backgrounds, but also the threats they face in the wild. So we're trying to use zoos as a way to educate the public about conservation needs and efforts. So for example, you can come through our gorilla enclosure, and there's some information in there about the threats that gorillas face in the wild and what ZSL is doing to help conserve natural habitats for gorillas in the wild. So like I said, education, it is good fun, it should be entertaining, but we're here to teach people about what animals are facing and what we can do to make everything better. Hi, I'm also here to support these students and say that they have been very well behaved, great questions, very smart, inquisitive, thoughtful students, and if possible, deserve highest marks for this project because they've done good work. They're the most dangerous.
Thank you. The zoo has changed massively in the last 100 years, going from a place for entertainment to a place for education. The zoo is now a place where people can learn. This is the role of a modern zoo.